Holodeck 3 program is reinstated.
Open sesame!
Commander Klingon vessel. We are energizing transporter beam. Now.
Warp 1, engage!
Okay, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck. This is the Picard edition. Hello, welcome. If you're new to the show, I am Michael, the host, and usually the co-host with me is David. Hello, David.
Hello, everybody.
Not usually, every time.
Every time.
Yeah, every time.
Unless I'm like a variant of another parallel universe.
Oh, maybe a golem? A golem version of David?
Golem, yeah.
Yeah, when I've had enough of you, I've killed you and then put
my unconsciousness
into an android body so that I can just look at you as the same as before, which makes no sense. Why did I kill you then? Just like Shaban writing, it makes no sense. Who wrote the beginning of this discussion today? Shaban.
Shaban?
He needed a job. I'm like, he came to me, hat in hand. I'm like, sure, buddy.
Do you think like he's outside that writing room just going, I have this idea, and then all of a sudden Kevin Goldsman goes, you, shut up. You go into the hallway.
Yeah. He probably just snaps his fingers. He probably wishes he had Q power so he could just make him I want to rip you from the timeline. You don't exist.
That would be a funny thing. Shavan's just sitting there and Akiva Goldsman just keeps snapping at him.
I think that's what they all did. At the end of season 1, when the reviews came in that most people hated the first season, he probably was fired and he was given a box, like, go get all your shit out of the office. And then on each side of the hallway, as he's walking out the door, everyone's just snapping at him. All right. So if you're a new listener, we do cover a wide variety of Star Trek content, and you can find our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search From the Holodeck. Okay, so this episode was directed by the one and only Jonathan Frakes and written by Cindy Appel. Okay, David, so this season is shaping up to be quite interesting and very different than anything we've seen before. And yes, they are utilizing certain elements we've seen before. That's not derivative necessarily, like some are saying. It's called continuity and canon.
Yes.
You're utilizing things that have been established in the world of Star Trek that then helps you tell a story. It's not reusing. It's not redoing. It's using things within canon to tell your story. There's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But the overall story, as I was saying, for the most part, is very unique. And David, as we had theorized in the last episode, we are dealing with the Picard bloodline, not just Jean-Luc.
Yes.
But we were incorrect about the Guardians of Forever.
We were close. It's close.
It's still one of the super beings, right?
Yeah, it's still one of the super beings from the original series.
We don't know much about these super beings, but we know what they're about for the most part.
Yes.
And what you were mentioning, Dave, is we're essentially dealing with a type of being or beings that have been mentioned, say alluded to in the original series. More specifically, it ties into Gary 7.
Gary 7. It ties into the alien race that was supposed to be Star Trek, the original series spinoff. Which was Gary 7.
David, I had no idea until today when I was working on the notes that the Gary 7 concept was supposed to be a spinoff for Star Trek.
Yeah. Essentially.
Did you know that?
Yeah, because Gary 7, back then, Gene Roddenberry was taking note of like other series that were out there. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, especially in Star Trek circles and in another franchise, basically mentioned he took the idea of Doctor Who and wanted to bring it to Star Trek.
Oh, okay.
And Gary 7 was supposed to be his version of Doctor Who.
Wow.
And the Doctor.
Who knows what, if that would have happened, who knows what Star Trek would have been like.
Oh, yeah. And if you look at it for like Star Trek fans that don't know about the Gary 7 story from the original series, think about it. When you go back and you watch Gary 7 is this being that has a interdimensional apartment that can fit anywhere. He travels throughout time and space.
That's a really cool concept.
He has a very very good looking female assistant that turns into a black cat.
Oh.
And on top of that, he has a device that's in the that looks like a pen.
Yes.
Which is basically the Dr. Sonic screwdriver.
Yeah, maybe that's why it didn't work. Maybe they felt like it was a hack maneuver. Like, listen, Gene, we love what you're doing with Star Trek, but Ixnay on the Doctor Who, it feels desperate. Just stop.
Well, because like at that time, Doctor Who wasn't as popular as it became like later on.
Yeah.
And Gene Roddenberry was like going, you know what? I see them doing something across the pond in England, and he wanted to bring that over.
We've had listeners, because I'm not a Doctor Who guy. I don't like it. I've tried to watch it, but I just don't like it.
Oh, I've watched everything of Doctor Who. Even the bad stuff.
We've had some listeners reach out and tell me several years ago that essentially Star Trek or Doctor Who is the British version of Star Trek in terms of popularity and what was popular at that time.
At that time, yeah.
In the 60s going on at the same time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like Doctor Who across the pond in England, but around that area, Doctor Who was just as popular as Star Trek was over here in North America.
See, that's interesting. I had no idea that this was going to essentially be the first official spinoff of Star Trek.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get there now, because when you think about what they're doing with Strange New Worlds, I mean, that's essentially take two on a dead pilot.
I would really like them to bring back the character of Gary Seven, because Gary Seven was really awesome. And actually they quote unquote did bring him back in the comic series that basically we were covering with Star Trek Year 5.
But that's not canon, though.
But it's not canon.
Yeah.
But like that in itself like shows was supposed to be kind of like where they thought they were going with the character of Gary Seven.
Yep. Okay, so just so we give a little bit more context behind this Gary Seven issue, so the episode of Picard here that we're talking about ties directly into Gary Seven and the original series episode Assignment Earth. So if you want to go back and watch that episode, it's one of the classic episodes, those iconic episodes that people write about and discuss all the time.
And it's one that they did time travel.
Yes. Now, in Assignment Earth, the Starship Enterprise time traveled to 1968 and accidentally intercepted Gary Seven as he was beaming to Earth. Seven, who was accompanied by a black cat named Isis, explained that he was a 20th century human who was raised on another planet that was never named, and his job was to protect the human race in this critical time in their history. Gary Seven was a Class 1 supervisor, designated Supervisor 194. He arrived on Earth to investigate the disappearance of two of his colleagues. When Seven learned that they were killed in an automobile accident, Supervisor 194 took over their mission to prevent the launch of an orbital nuclear platform that could start World War III.
Yes.
Keep that fresh in your mind right there, okay, everyone? Because I have a feeling this is all connected. World War III is a big part of Star Trek canon, and essentially it's the very moment in human history that changes humanity when they recognize what they're doing to the world and themselves, and that's when the light switches on, and they realize they need to change their ways, and then usher in First Contact. So we're going to get back to that in a second. So Gary Seven also used a versatile device called a servo and had advanced technology such as the Beta 5 computer.
Beta 5 computer.
Okay, David. So in the Star Trek TOS episode Assignment Earth, Captain James T. Kirk and Mr. Spock beamed to Earth incognito and helped Gary Seven destroy the orbital nuclear platform. And all of this is important for a reason here. We're going to get to it. They also encountered Gary's human assistant, Roberta Lincoln.
Yes.
Jean-Luc has already made several references to Kirk's Enterprise in this season of Star Trek Picard.
Yep.
You don't do things like that just because you want that Easter egg moment or that recognition from audiences, because to be quite honest, no one gives a shit anymore. Like, we all know all these shows are interconnected. So when you make mention of Captain Kirk, sure, it's great the first time. But if you repeatedly bring up Captain Kirk and the Enterprise, there's got to be a reason why the writers want that fresh on our minds. And it's because I don't believe this is a coincidence. Star Trek Picard Season 2 does seem like it's directly tying into the events of Assignment Earth.
Yeah, I do notice that, especially like with a lot of elements that was happening in this episode. It really has been hammering the notion that we're tackling one of the greatest mysteries of Star Trek. What caused the Federation to actually become the Federation? And everyone, since TOS knows, by narrative, World War III was the thing that
Story. Yeah,
that started the whole springboard into becoming the Federation, because humanity had to hit rock bottom,
right,
to climb itself back out of the abyss.
Yes.
And they've always alluded to it throughout even all of Star Trek. I mean, even in Deep Space Nine, when the crew went back and they showed what like the early 20th century was to them, and you see all the homelessness and like, I'm so happy that basically in Picard in the last episode they touched on that to show that that element of the 20th century is right there still.
Well, it's also trying to get us ready, even though we are living in this very century and we are aware of the atrocities that's going on ecologically, as well as when it comes to genocide and all of the things that we do to our planet and ourselves. We are our own worst enemy.
Yeah.
And that has always been the foundation of Star Trek, that humanity got to a point of just complete failure, and it needed to change in order to survive. And that was the turning point was of course, or I should say the end of that turning point is the Federation, the ideology that formed the Federation.
The utopia.
It comes out of all of this chaos and this madness. And that is why now when you look back at the first 4 episodes of Star Trek, many of the things that they're doing makes a lot of sense, like bringing home the point about immigration and the issues of homelessness.
Yes.
And also they've mentioned pollution. It's not because they're trying to be woke necessarily, like some people are saying on social media. They're trying to sow the seeds of our destruction. They're trying to show you that this is directly everything that we're doing right now in this fictional world of Star Trek. We're on the path that leads to our annihilation and also humanity's triumph.
And I think
but in order to get there, you have to go through the ashes of essentially Armageddon, World War III. And then from that moment is when we reach our enlightened phase. And that's why when you look at those past episodes, everything is there purposely, because they're trying to give us the idea that or sell us that the notion that we're living in the end of times, that we're at that point, that singularity, if you will, of when humanity will change forever.
Oh yeah, and like the thing that I think people have to understand, there's a difference between writing a woke story, throwing around I'm getting tired of people throwing around the term this is too woke.
Yeah.
For every single story that has to have an agenda. Yes, an agenda piece is terrible. You know, me and you have gone back and forth about this.
When that's all that's driving
When it's all that's driving it.
Yeah.
However, you have to look at what Gene Roddenberry set the table prior to everything. He wanted to show that the Federation is the utopia. The utopia had to start at rock bottom. So showing us these elements of like injustice and actually deplorable environments and stuff like that makes sense, because now you see the Federation building up. That is different from talking about a woke agenda.
Yeah.
And that's the thing I think people have to get across when I always hear them criticize a story now, when they say, oh, this is just about a woke agenda.
You also have to remember, in Star Trek canon, okay, so we're in the year 2024 right now. World War III, according to Star Trek canon, starts in 2026.
2026.
That's 2 years from where they are. So the fact that they're really selling, or in some cases that some people may say, overselling the idea that we are staring at our destruction, it's just around the corner. Yes, they are selling that idea.
They are selling that
because in Star Trek canon, World War III is just 2 years away.
And you got to also remember that basically Gene Roddenberry's point was to use Star Trek as kind of like a cautionary tale.
Yep.
It was supposed to be, hey, if you don't wake up and you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. Armageddon happens. World War III happens.
And also, there's not a lot of context. So there may be some people who don't quite understand what's happening, which we'll get into in a second. But just to strengthen this final point here, or this point that we're on here before we move on, you also have to remember that the eugenics war that's also been established in Star Trek canon since the conception of Star Trek has already taken place as well. It took place from 1992 to 1996.
Yes.
So they're also dealing with the aftermath of that. That's why the scenes with Soong in this episode were so vital to help the audience understand some of the context of this potential fallout that's just right around the corner.
And you notice the difference between bringing in Soong at this point in Picard, then in season 1. This has a point to it.
What?
This has a point why he's here.
What does that mean, David?
Because you're taking into context the legacy storyline of the Soong family.
And that's why I have no problem with them introducing a new Soong, because this one actually makes perfect sense.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to get to why in a second. I don't want to jump too ahead, because if we do, our entire discussion will fall apart, because this episode is fucking difficult. If you know all the ins and outs of Star Trek canon, this episode is literally a defining element to all of Star Trek. And that's why now I'm a little scared. Not because it's bad. It's actually good. But because if they fail, they run the risk of destroying so much. Literally everything in Star Trek will be destroyed if they drop the ball this season, because they're juggling all these major elements in Star Trek canon and trying to connect it back to Picard. And that takes us to Laris, Dave.
Yeah.
Or Laris. Okay, so obviously she does not know Picard. She knows of Picards because her assignment is Rene Picard.
Yes.
But I'm wondering, because they're not addressing her similarities, why she looks exactly like this Laris. The Laris that we know, I should say. I'm wondering if her job was obviously to watch Rene Picard. I'm assuming her assignment as a supervisor is to keep an eye on the Picard bloodline. And that would make sense then why she has embedded herself into Picard's life in the 24th century that we're in now with Picard, in the TNG era. It would make sense why she has embedded. And if they end up explaining that as the reason why, you know, she made herself look like a Romulan and then embedded herself into Picard's life in order to keep an eye on him. And if you look at season 1, even though I don't believe this was their strategy, her and her husband both protected Picard.
Yeah.
During numerous moments during that season.
They were his guardians in a lot of ways.
They were. So I'm wondering if they're going to
tie that in,
retcon it essentially, you know, or flesh it out. I would say is a better way of putting that.
I would say like probably flesh it out, because like you have to explain,
because the Shea Band didn't have this idea.
No, because especially since Laris from the very beginning has been portrayed as this person that just watches over Picard, but she's married. Mm-hmm. She has a husband.
Well, maybe her husband's also a supervisor.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden in season 2, you have this underlying chemistry. I'll probably romantic tension is probably more appropriate to say it, but like this tension between Laris and Picard with no sign of the husband anywhere.
Well, he died.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm assuming that, I mean, we are jumping the gun here. We'll find out what part she plays down the road.
Oh, yeah.
But I think at this point it's safe to say that is That is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a supervisor who was also watching after Jean-Luc.
After Jean-Luc.
During his time, yeah. All right, so this is the first time ever since maybe Encounter at Farpoint that Q actually appeared to be truly benevolent, a bad guy.
Yeah.
The reason for this is not completely clear. They have alluded to the fact that he is ill. Something's not right with him. Perhaps he's losing his grip on reality. Does he have some type of cognitive disease like I do, obviously, that's messing with his sanity? Because as of this episode, he appears to be completely out of character.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Normally I would. Normally I would say, how dare you? You're destroying someone's characterization. But it feels intentional rather than them completely trying to retcon Q's characterization. What part does he have to play? And as we know, he was directly involved with the Rene Picard aspect. He was attempting to do something when his power gave out. And as plan B, he's now approaching this new Soong character that was introduced. And now, David, we're dealing with yet another member of the Soong family.
But this time, Mike, I still say it's far better dealt with than freaking, I even forgot his freaking...
Eric. Yeah,
Eric
the one that didn't make sense, yeah.
Yeah, it's better dealt with than Eric because, like, at least with this Soong, I actually really feel for this character's plight. I mean, I like the element that they throw in. Like, he's a man that's pushed to the limit because he wants to save his daughter.
But also, if you look at everything that we've ever been given pertaining to Soong, the Soong family,
yeah,
they're always in the gray area. They're not necessarily bad. They're not good. In fact, I would say they're very hard to pinpoint in the ways of morality and ethics. They're in the gray area. But what's the one thing, the driving force that always pushes them into that gray area? It is their sentimentality. And it's their connection to family.
Family
It's
and
their
children.
need for family. It's their desire to save their family. We've seen this now in Picard. We've seen it in TNG.
TNG all the time.
Yeah. So I'm okay with this. This actually works really well. But the mystery now is, what part does this new Soong, Adam Soong, play in the future of Star Trek? Because, as I said, Q's power failed him.
Yes.
He then enlisted the help of Adam Soong, who interestingly has a daughter that looks just like Soji.
Yeah.
And her name is Kor, I believe. Was it Corey or Kor?
Kor
Soong, who has a genetic disorder.
Yes.
Now, before we get into the whys, because there are, I do like this bit because it again aligns well with Trek canon. The Soongs have always seemed, as I said, to live within that gray area of ethics, not outright evil or necessarily bad, just questionable.
Yeah.
And now let's take it up a notch further. They had mentioned in this episode, during some type of judicial committee,
Yeah.
they mentioned...
Head by Leah Thompson.
Yes.
Which was awesome.
Yes, it was. They mentioned the Spearhead operation. Now, this is the first time we've heard of this name, but what he's accused of is not something new. Spearhead Operation was a private military organization on Earth in the 21st century. That's what we know so far.
Yeah.
Now, while searching for a cure to his daughter, Kor Soong's genetic defect, Dr. Adam Soong partnered with Spearhead Operations in 2024 to conduct genetic experiments on ex-soldiers in violation of the Shenzhen Convention.
Yes.
Okay. This obviously is connected to the eugenics war.
Yeah.
Which had everything to do with creating super soldiers, which was banned in this fictional world of Star Trek.
That's where we got Khan.
Yes. Now we also know that the other Soong, Eric Soong. Hold on. Let me bring up these Soongs. Hold on a second. There's just
It's
too many
confusing,
of them.
isn't it?
Yeah. Give me a second here. I'm going to bring up the Soong family. So I have all of my Soongs in line.
Well, while you have that, the one thing I want to say about like the Soong lineage, the thing I love what they did here was they brought it full circle with the Soongs are kind of like have this really tragic history when it comes to their legacies. You have Adam, who has a sick daughter who's dying, and he's doing whatever he can to continue to save her. And then you get to Data's father. I forgot. I can't say his first name properly, but Dr. Soong, who wanted sons but couldn't have any because his wife died. And then the two sons that he did create end up becoming like Cain and Abel, and they can never get along. And it created this break in the family. And again, the Soong family just seems ill-fated and like this tragic curse.
And that's why I kind of like how they're bringing it back, because even this new Soong, Adam Soong, is directly connected with Eric Soong's interest. If you look at his biography, and he was introduced in Star Trek Enterprise,
yes,
and he was directly connected with the with Khan's super soldiers.
Yes.
Eric Soong was a brilliant doctor of genetics in the 22nd century. He believed that humanity's abandonment of genetic engineering after the eugenics war was a mistake. So now we have these connections, and that's why I'm saying that what they're doing here, David, they got to be careful. Seems like they're connecting all the old dots, some dots that we never knew needed to be connected, some dots that have been sitting stale for decades. They're now bringing them back to the forefront and now fleshing out and recontextualizing literally everything we know of the history of Star Trek. Now, David, this is where it gets complicated. Adam Soong, the new Soong that was introduced in this episode of Picard, was actually already mentioned in the second episode of this season, when Picard was first trying to figure out what was going on, and they were showing us the city of the new Confederation of Earth, and in the background you see a hologram of Adam Soong, and he is essentially saying the line about humanity.
Yeah, a safe galaxy is a human galaxy.
Yes, the Nazi slogan, if you will, made to fit into the context of Star Trek. Now, it looks like we might be dealing with a predestination paradox, Dave, and this is where it gets complicated. When you start looking at everything they're doing, okay, having Picard try to secure a future that entails his ancestry. Now we have Adam Soong involved and the Soong family. We know we can't stop World War III. It has to happen in order for the Federation to come into existence.
Yes.
I have a feeling that we are playing with a predestination paradox, at least for part of this. And if you don't know what a predestination paradox is, let me reread this yet again. A predestination paradox or causality loop and a closed loop are closed time loops, is a paradox of time travel that is often used as a convention in science fiction. It exists when a time traveler, let's put Picard in there, is caught in a loop of events that predestines or predates them traveling back in time, and then they themselves have a hand in creating their own future.
Yes.
And it then brings up the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And that's an answer that continues into something called infinite regress. There is no answer.
Or for our less educated audience members
David,
out there, Mike, think Futurama.
What is that, David? I've never even watched that.
Futurama is an animation by Matt Groening.
I know. I'm just joking.
Yeah. But basically the whole idea of Fry going back into time, having sex with his grandmother, and basically being his own ancestor.
Yeah.
That's what a causal loop is.
There you go. So you go back in time to stop something or make sure something happens, and you realize that as you're doing that, I'm a part of the very past that makes my future.
Yes.
And there's the paradox. So how is all this going to fit into the bigger picture of Star Trek? Well, if you look at every war or all the major wars in this time period in the Star Trek universe, you have the eugenics war. They've already touched on that, and it's already happened. You have World War III that is supposed to happen in the year 2026. That's just around the corner. Then you have, of course, First Contact about 30, 40 years later. So they're trying to stop, or I assume Q, or at least they want us to believe, that Q is trying to prevent Renee from traveling in order to doom humanity, right?
Yes.
I have a feeling that she's not supposed to necessarily do this. She's supposed to fail. I think it's the opposite.
You bring a very interesting point, because you brought this prior-hand, and it made my head spin. But when you think about it, it makes complete sense.
It can go two different ways. Either A, if they want to go the simple route, Picard's going to realize that in order for him to secure their future, he has to do what he's about to do has to take place in the past. And suddenly we realize there's a paradoxical element here, because in order to secure that future, Picard has to be here in the past. And what that means is that the very future that we have been privy to for over 50 years of Star Trek canon is only made possible because of Picard traveling back in time and by Q fucking with time. And it feels like Q, yes, he's not fully well, right? He's sick. There's something not right about him.
Yes.
But at the same time, what if there's a much bigger story here? What if they're trying to show us why Q is, in fact, sick or connected to Picard?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe his connection to Picard is because this is the part he plays in the future of humanity. When he called himself Death and the Destroyer of Worlds, I have a feeling that what he's doing is because he is the catalyst of World War III.
Yes.
World War III has to happen in order for humanity to save itself. But in order for that to happen, millions upon millions must die.
Yes.
And that can only happen if Q fucks with the timeline and then causes Picard to go back in time to fix that timeline that he fucks with.
Yes.
That's a paradox. I honestly feel that's what they're trying to do. That Picard single-handedly is the greatest human being in all of existence, because he's the very one that all of Starfleet and the Federation and this utopia rests on.
And it makes sense. I know for a lot of people, probably their heads are spinning at this notion, but one thing that you have to realize as Star Trek fans.
Was that clear, David, first off, or was I babbling?
No,
Does that
was
make
clear.
sense? Okay.
That was much more clear than I thought we would get to, because it does make your head spin. But the one element that you have to, as Star Trek fans, we have to maintain, Zefram Cochrane has to be that catalyst. It cannot be anybody else. If it's somebody else, that changes everything of First Contact. And First Contact was the establishment of basically, hey, the Federation, that's the beginnings of the Federation. The Vulcans see us actually get warp capabilities and come and see what the hell's going on. If that is changed. So that's why I like what you were going with in the very beginning, was like, what if this whole point is Q needs to stop whatever Renee is doing? Because if he doesn't, Renee succeeds before Zefram Cochrane does.
Yeah.
And then thus changing the entire landscape. And if, and now this is where my logic comes in, if Renee succeeds First Contact prior to Zefram Cochrane, during a time frame when humanity is this down, out, and broken, they would turn into a totalitarian regime like that, because you're essentially just basically giving, a monkey a grenade at that point.
Oh, David, be nice to the monkeys. Just say you're giving a human a monkey.
I have very little.
A human a grenade, because that fits better.
I have very little faith in humanity.
Yeah. Well, okay, Dave. So that's why I'm saying, no matter how you look at it now, Picard is literally the reason why we have the future we have. Let's say the show ends and he succeeds.
Exactly.
Well, okay, he succeeds because he went to the past and now he's a part of the past. He's a part of the history, and the future that's now secured is because he played his part in the past. So either way you look at it, it's a paradox. And either way you look at it, Picard is single-handedly responsible for the utopia.
Yes. And
which I think is, if that's what they're doing, David, if there was any other character in Star Trek, I might shrug and frown and be like, what the fuck? But if this is the way they're officially sending the character Picard off into the sunset, because as we know, Patrick Stewart is an older gentleman, and it's realistically, there's only so long he has left and how much longer he could do this show. So if this is their final goodbye to Picard and they give him this type of importance in the world of Star Trek, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And essentially because, like, as Star Trek fans, all of us always felt Jean-Luc Picard embodies everything about the Federation. Mm-hmm. He is by far the epitome of an icon of the Federation. It goes on the line of, like what they did in Discovery with Captain Pike, sending Captain Pike out there because he represents the best of us. Picard's like that.
Yeah.
Picard represents the best of not just the Federation, but of humanity. Because if you think about it, all the characters out there, Picard has always been portrayed as human, but he's very Gandhi-like. He's very peaceful. He's always quick to negotiate. He's not quick to violence. He can be a violent person. I mean, we've seen it before in First Contact where he lets his emotions go, but that's because he's human.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. Okay, David, so let's say all of this that we've been talking about is in fact going to happen. Let's say Soong did something terrible. Let's say he was bad, even before
Yes.
Q's involvement. The way the writers have set this scenario up, it's very well done.
Yeah.
They've essentially given themselves a large time frame to play in. And then they use Picard to establish this idea. When he said, not a lot is known after this period because the century leading to First Contact was rife with chaos. So right there gives the writers a bit of a blank check.
Yes.
They can dabble and fuck around pretty much with anything in this time period because essentially World War III and all the wars that followed or that led up to World War III, let's say, essentially erased human history. As we know, wars do that. If you look at wars from a century ago, 2 centuries ago, many times people's ancestry is destroyed. True historical facts are not quite clear. I mean, look at the Mayan culture is a perfect example, or the Aztec culture is a perfect example of this. That's a culture that's only 400 or 500 years in our past, and yet we know nothing about them. We know tons of things about the Greeks and the Romans because they had a system of language and writing that secured their history.
Yeah.
That made sure that people would know of their history. The Aztec culture was annihilated and destroyed literally overnight. Everything was burnt to the ground by the Spanish conquistadors. And to this day, we don't know anything truly about that civilization. We have ideas. So it's very easy to smite a culture in such a way that you would know nothing about them 100 years, 200 years later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
No, Cap. Come back here.
Okay. All right, we're back. Welcome, everyone. Hopefully you're still tuning in. Okay, so the importance of Rene Picard was made clear a bit in this episode. It could also be misdirection, but apparently Rene Picard's travel or her space flight is very important because she discovers microbes on Io, which is a moon, which is a moon of Jupiter, correct?
Yes.
Because that's what Europa is. I know
Europa.
that. Now, if people aren't aware of this, if we are, to this day, scientists believe, astrophysicists believe that if there is any life in our solar system, that the only places that they could be is on the moons of Jupiter.
Yes.
Because of how they rotate around Jupiter, because of their rotation and their position to the planet and the gravity that keeps them going around that planet, it actually causes them to rotate.
Yes.
And because of that, the moons are considered alive, meaning they're not dead. A dead planet or a dead moon doesn't rotate.
Doesn't rotate.
And because of that, because of their position to Jupiter, they are considered planets that are alive. There is tectonic, Jesus Christ. Yeah, tectonic.
Yeah,
Tectonic, I can't talk. Activity. There you go. Volcanic activity. It's alive, basically. Everything that makes a planet or a moon considered to be alive, the moons on Jupiter are that.
Moons of Jupiter have it. And there's a lot of speculation that there's an atmosphere because of that. Because that's one of the key things of making a livable planet is the planet must have a gravitational effect, a pull.
Yep. They got to generate heat. And
they generate heat.
Yeah. So I apologize, David. I am out of sorts. I have a dog next to me that almost died.
Well, then
I also can't think correctly today.
Well, also you got to throw in, we're dealing with a episode that has time travel implications, science implications, and, planetary implications. Because that's a lot of stuff being thrown at the episode. And that's why I was telling you is I'm not really sure about this because I like your point that basically they're doing a really great narration and they're building a really strong house. Mm-hmm. However, I would add there that basically the house is built on cards. So one little mess up can take the house of cards down.
Well, yeah. And also, David, the episode itself, it's a very strange episode because the episode was very good. It was. But there's a lot of danger in this episode. There's also a simplicity too, which might sound odd because I don't want to say it's convoluted. If you know what to look for, there's a lot of moving parts.
And unfortunately, me and you have covered so many TV shows throughout the years, we can pinpoint those habits in TV shows. And they're what we would call red flags.
Yeah.
You could say that there were a couple red flags in this episode where you go, that could be a sign of bad, like an omen, right? An omen of bad tidings. But at the end of the day, when I was done with this episode, I had a lot of fun with this episode because the implications were so monumentous.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting to, Dave. Yes, this episode has a lot of gravitas. There's a lot hinging on it.
There's a lot hinging
and the writing was fine as well. But when you really break down the mechanics of the episode, it's actually very simple, and the plot is relatively thin.
Yes.
There really isn't a lot going on. And at the beginning of the episode, I'm not a fan of exposition. I felt like they could have explained a few things pertaining to the supervisor a little bit better than, all right, I guess I'm going to tell you what I do. And I'm going to tell you my purpose. And I'm going to tell you who this Rene Picard's all about. That part, I understand there comes a point in a TV show when you're dealing with mysterious elements that you have to kind of have those types of things in order to fill in the audience.
Yes.
But it's not always ideal for me anyways. So I did roll my eyes at the beginning of the episode when she starts telling Picard everything.
And think about it.
But it does work for the purpose of the episode. As you get through the episode, you realize how heavy this can actually or could actually be. And because of that, I understand why they chose to give us that bit of an exposition dump. Yeah.
But also on top of that, we just talked about even just one part of the episode. There's so many other parts of the episode that came together that were good. I mean, the Agnes stuff with the Borg Queen, really interesting. Kind of interesting implications at the very end. I don't want to give any spoilers because that was cool.
What? Well, of course, David, we're talking. Spoilers are fine.
Spoilers are fine?
Yes. Are you new to this show, David?
Well, Mike, that ending, I wasn't expecting that. I was like going, they're going to do that to Agnes? What the fuck?
Well, David, come on. Why are you playing coy? This was your theory.
This was my theory.
You're the one who said, "What if we're dealing with the Borg Queen, David?" And here we are again. David.
But Mike,
David.
You know,
this is more of the paradox. I think this moment strengthened your theory.
Yeah.
Because the Borg Queen exists in the TNG era.
TNG era.
Okay. And that means what came first. If Agnes is that queen, she's only that queen because this had already happened. She had to travel back in time and merge with the Borg Queen to become the new Borg Queen.
and see, even that again.
I hope they're doing this.
That's what gives it so much
David,
gravity that we're on the right path.
If they do everything we're talking about and they pull it off, this could be the greatest moment in Star Trek history. Because they can bring so many things together in a way that none of us would have imagined.
Oh, yeah.
If someone had told me, hey, give me your thoughts on what season 2 is going to be about, I'm like, I don't fucking know. I have no idea. But now that you're looking at all of the things they're doing and how all these little pieces fit into Star Trek history, and then when you bring up the theory that you had, because honestly, David, that's what got me to think. When you said, what if the Borg Queen is Agnes, that's what started to make me think. So when I watched this episode, I'm like, you know what? I think everything that's happening has to happen.
Has to happen for a reason, especially since we know that the whole...
It's not simply about repairing the timeline. It's about making that timeline happen because this is the only way that timeline could ever exist.
Exactly.
Is by the timeline being broken first.
And then if you think about it...
confusing.
And then you jump to Raffi and Seven. Now their whole plot line seems very innocuous because they're trying to save Rios, right? Mm-hmm. But their dialogue... Dude, if you look at the dialogue, what is Seven and Raffi talking about? Breaking timeline, time laws. Yep. And it's like, okay, you have them talking about breaking time laws and basically how that justifies everything. But then you have like stuff that's Agnes and Picard going on, questioning about like what came first.
Yeah.
Did they come first or did that come first? What the hell? That is breaking time law.
Yeah. It's quite intriguing, Dave. And I will say the moment Jurati had started to be assimilated I was like, shit, David was right. Look at David.
Yeah.
Look at you calling the big ones out. You called Q. I ran with it though. I ran with it, but you were the first one.
You were the one that basically came up with for verbatim. He's going to show up and go, "Oh, maybe I'll make you feel better."
Well, it goes to show you, David, that with our brain powers combined, we could probably write a pretty
good season.
Good Star Trek season. Yeah.
Good Star Trek season.
All right. So, Dave, any final thoughts before you give me your score?
Oh, man. But I just wanted to double down on what you were saying is like, this was a very difficult episode, not in a bad way, but a difficult episode to actually read because like they're tackling things that basically are very heavy.
I have a quick question for you, Dave, on that thought there. Okay. Because you made me think. Do you think this is as, I don't want to say confusing is not the right word because it's not confusing. Do you think it's as complicated to regular average Star Trek viewers, or is it only complicated to us because we know the Star Trek history and we know the connections?
But that's the thing. They have to not only make it understandable to the mass audiences, but I think it's very important to make it understandable to Star Trek fans now.
Yeah, well, I think they will. What they need to share with people, they will. But do you think people are as stressed and on the edge of their seat as we are because we do know these connections?
I think that basically people, from what I've been noticing, who aren't quote unquote hardcore Star Trek fans, they're very intrigued. Like the mystery has them hooked.
Okay.
for Star Trek fans, for us, we're all worried because like
we're reading between the lines.
We're reading between the lines, and we're like going, "Oh my God, they brought in this element. So what does that mean for future? Does that are they going to retcon this?" And that's the line that they have to kind of skirt right now. And
my only question about this paradox, David. Sorry for cutting you off. If I don't, David, I'll forget my train of thought because I'm an idiot tonight. So I apologize. The only thing is what does the temporal wars fit in? Exactly. If the temporal wars are such a huge part of Star Trek history, then why
hasn't any agent shown up? Right. And Seven should know about the temporal wars because like the fact that
it was a part of Voyager.
It was part of Voyager, and I do like that's why I enjoyed that they were the ones that talked about, hey, temporal law. What's happened? They can't break anything. That's why it seems innocent enough, but to a Star Trek fan, it makes sense when I think it was Seven that basically said, I can't just beam in there and pull Rios out because that would affect how everyone sees the timeline. What the hell just happened?
Okay, so you keep bringing up more points, David, that makes me think even further. So look at what Alice Q said. I am the butterfly.
I am the butterfly.
Okay, we all know that terminology and what it means to time travel, the butterfly effect.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying Q is here because he has to be here. I have a feeling he's playing a part as well. It's not about necessarily him being bad or evil. It feels like this is what he has to do. And just like Picard's doing what he has to do, Q has to play this part as well.
Well, think about
I am the butterfly. Well, I am the destroyer of worlds.
And think about this. When in episode 1, I think it was episode 1 or 2, where Q makes the statement that basically the whole, one of my favorite moments in the entire series so far, calling himself the suture I'm the suture within the wound.
Yeah.
And because
it's all there, David.
You take that line, that monologue between Picard and Q, and at first I was thinking, oh, Q's probably sick, he's dying. But then you get to this where you're dealing with okay, temporal effects. He starts saying that he's the butterfly, and all of a sudden I'm going, wait a minute. We were thinking that Q was acting sick. What if Q is acting guilty because he knows that the time has come for him to fulfill something that he is probably going to carry for the rest of his existence? And the death of an entire civilization, right? Causing a World War III.
Yeah. Well, not an entire civilization, but close to.
Close to it. Yeah. That would weigh heavily on any sentient being.
Especially Q, who has a fondness for humanity. He always has.
Yeah, it's very it reminds me of the creator of the atomic bomb. I think it was Oppenheimer, Dr. Oppenheimer, who basically said he was traumatized by the fact that what he became I think the famous line was, I became the death of the world, or something on those lines. And that always stuck with someone who essentially blames himself for the deaths of millions upon millions of people. Imagine a sentient being realizing billions of people just died in this war because you created it.
Yep. So what's your score, Dave?
My score for this one was fluctuating all over the place, but I came to the end of giving it a solid 90.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of elements here I'm really liking. Yes, I see two big red flags to me, but after talking about it with you, I feel like, hey, let's give them a shot. We're at the midway point. Let's see where episode 6 now brings us. I think it's episode 6. But with all the storylines getting weaved around, I'm hoping that the house of cards that they're building stays tall.
Yeah.
That's all.
I'm right there with you, David, and I'm getting nervous, and the only reason, not because it's bad, but because it's good. And they managed to. I feel like Al Pacino in The Godfather 3. They're pulling me back in. I was out, and they're pulling me back in.
Yeah, I felt like that in episode 3.
I was ready to just watch this with no expectation. All right, it's Star Trek. We're going to talk about it. We're going to cover it. And that's it. That's all there will be to it. That's all there will be to it. That's it. No expectations. Just take what they give us and just deal with it. But now I'm excited. Now I really like what they're doing. Now, I will agree with you and say it is on a house of cards, and sometimes that's used as a negative. But in this case, it's more of a caution. It's like, because everything they're doing works, but if they just make one mistake, the entire thing can fall apart, you can run the risk of destroying literally the entire history of Star Trek if you break it. So you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
But the thing that I keep going to that I really hope this is what they're doing now is this paradox. Is Q the cause of World War III? Has this always been Picard's destiny? Will the events happening in Star Trek Picard Season 2 be the catalyst that initiates the very history that has been the foundation of all of Star Trek for the past 50 years?
Can you imagine the point where I'm imagining where it's going, and Picard in the very end coming to the realization that he has to help Q start World War III.
Oh my God, David!
In order to
stop
actually,
it right now,
and actually to fulfill humanity's destiny to become the Federation, they have to create. They have to actually make World War III happen.
Can you imagine that? That goes right back to if they do that, that brings up the whole debate, that philosophical debate.
Yeah.
About should we have dropped a nuke
on Japan? And there are people that say, well, yes, thousands and thousands and thousands of people died for numerous years. It was an atrocity. How many people died, actually? Millions. Sorry. Millions of people died. And it's a horrible atrocity that we have to live with for the rest of our lives. But then the other side says, but it also ended the war and probably saved countless millions of lives. Everyone constantly says, well, it saved millions of soldier lives.
Yeah.
Instead of going on a foot war.
Right.
But because also the people who come to the defense of that, you have to also remember, not only did the atomic bomb kill millions upon millions at that moment in Japan, but think of all the accidents, all the accidents of nuclear energy since the bomb dropped.
Yeah.
How many of those people died?
Yeah. So that's why I feel like that idea you just had, Dave, that what if Picard is the one that has to do it?
And he's left with that question.
Imagine if that's, if they do that, that is the greatest philosophical question to ever pose in Star Trek.
And you leave it between Picard and Q.
Can you imagine that Picard has to allow World War III to happen? And listen, yes, he understands that history is history and it has to happen in order for this future, but to be the actual one to allow it to happen, that's going to weigh heavy. And if that's the way we send Picard out into the sunset, David, I would be very happy, because that is such an amazing story.
Yeah.
What if this is the path not traveled?
Yeah. Because people, I said in the beginning of the show, it has to keep intact Zefram Cochrane creating First Contact.
Yeah.
Because that's the initial element that started the Federation.
Yep. So we'll see what happens, Dave. I am very excited, and it makes me nervous.
Yep.
But everything is going smoothly so far. I mean, I'm hoping listeners out there are also enjoying. I know last year we had some people that love to hear us get angry during our discussions last season, and I'm hoping those people are appreciating our more positive discussions this year, because they're also enjoying the season. For the most part, it does seem like there are people, the general consensus on social media does seem like a lot of people are enjoying this season, and the people who just shat all over the first season, including us, are now enjoying this season. So it goes to show you that just a little smarts in that writing room can really, change the direction of things.
Yeah.
And that's definitely what they're doing. All right, so this does bring us to the end. I want to thank everyone for listening, and also head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/RainmanDigital, and pledge. If you pledge $5 or more a month, you'll gain access to additional podcast discussions that we do every single month, as well as our pre-shows. Don't hesitate. Head over. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.